All right, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa bishrah li sadri, wa yassir li amri, wa hlul uqdatan min lisani, yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair, guys, for joining. And for those of you who will be watching the replay, appreciate you guys making the time to do that. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from all of us with barakah and make it a meaningful discussion. So this idea of reading with presence is one of the pillars of the habits that we've been kind of tracking as a community of 11 habits of highly successful Muslim healthcare professionals. And reading is one of those habits. We've kind of gone over different habits over the last few months since Ramadan, from Quran to the habit of Salah, to the habit of exercise and movement, and one that we talked about a couple of months ago was on being present at work as well as in life in general. And so this is kind of building on that conversation that we had, especially in the kind of environment that we find ourselves today, where we're all struggling to stay focused. So we want to kind of remind ourselves about how powerful reading with presence is, and particularly at a time like this. So as we do all the time, we want to start with a conscious Bismillah and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put barakah in this time that we're spending together today. And Bismillah, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So as we always do, we want this to be interactive. So if you guys will oblige me. Why this matters, as we're seeing here, we're all getting inputs from several different sources. The phone is a big one for many of us, right? But oftentimes we don't even slow down enough to give due diligence to what's coming across on our screens, the tabs, the multiple tabs that we have open. And so that is impacting our focus and our attention muscle. But the tradition in Islam is such that reading is such a big part of our identity as Muslims. In fact, as we all know, the first command, the first revelation was that we should read. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Iqra, read in the name of your Lord. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. In the name of your Lord who created you. And so reading is a central part of the Islamic identity. But unfortunately, with so much competition for our minds, for our attention, for our focus, we're losing this identity just like every other person across the globe is struggling with this. So how can we bring this back? But before we get into how can we bring this back, I'm curious to hear from you guys, if this is a struggle, or how you guys are approaching reading.
Uh, in my case, I usually depending on what I'm reading, I'll usually have an audio along with the reading material. So, for example, I use AI a lot to convert the text into speech, and then I'll just read along with the speech. And so it's like getting it from multiple inputs. And then I can pause it, reread it myself. Just because sometimes reading dense text at a single point in time can make it hard to really digest what I'm reading, and I need to say it out loud too. So that's one way that I do it. I definitely see the problem of not be having shallow focus when I'm trying to read, where it's okay, I've read what seems to be a small amount, but I need to shift my focus to something else for a little bit before coming back. And I think that also plays into the format of what we're reading as well, right? And the setting that we're reading. You mentioned the multiple tabs. If you have the multiple tabs there and one of the tabs contains what you're reading, it's a lot easier for you to lose focus or get distracted than if you had like a physical book in front of you where the distractions aren't as easily accessible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can relate to that. Jazakallah khair for sharing. So when you say AI, to convert text to speech, is this for all manner of reading material, including like your medical text and all of
Yeah, for the most part, I use that a lot mainly because it helps me to um when I can always revisit it because I have those audio files, I can play it back again to kind of, re-get that information when I'm on a drive, for example, or
that?
you know, it because I'm not that good at just when I in terms of my learning style, reading straight text without any visuals or audio is harder for me to, I guess, understand it in multiple passes without doing it like multiple times.
Mm,
So I think that just supplements it. So I do that relatively frequently.
mashallah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Anwar, care to share?
I apologize. So I lost the connection in between as I was transferring from my trying to listen through my Bluetooth, and I couldn't continue the conversation. My apology. So I just
No
got.
problem. Okay, no problem at all. Yeah, we were just sharing experiences about the challenges we're currently having with reading, um, because of so much distraction around for all of us these days, especially on our phone, multiple tabs. Because a lot of reading, I think, is happening on people's phones as opposed to on more traditional uh, means of getting reading material like books. So just curious, what is your own experience?
So I have to admit, I'm not a big reader. So since I completed my medical graduated, I don't read typically.
Yeah.
So most of my source of information is through maybe you listening or through
Mm,
browsing, and so unfortunately, no, I'm I'm not a big reader. I don't finish the books.
yeah. Yeah. I, yeah. Jazakallah khair for sharing. I think it's a challenge that all of us have. And I think one of the reasons we're trying to bring you know, this tradition, that is an identity for us as Muslims, is for this exact reason. There's many things that compete for our time, and oftentimes, while reading is important, it's always not, oftentimes not an urgent thing, especially once you finish like your main vocational studies, medical school, residency, fellowship. Once all those things are out of the window, you kind of settle into a different type of focus. Yeah, so I can relate to that too. Alhamdulillah. Okay, Jazakallah khair for sharing. Um, would you agree that many of us healthcare professionals do want to read though, and that what's getting in the way is actually the fact that we're super busy, we're distracted, we're fatigued, and the times that maybe we can fit in a little bit of reading. And even when we do read, you know, very little comes out of it because our minds are just not there. Would you guys agree with that?
I think so. It's a good habit. We should be reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it also ties into like when we do like finally take that step to read, what exactly is it that we're reading, and how are
Hmm.
we reading that thing? I think you touched upon that a little bit, where it's like, are we reading just for the pages, for example, if it's in the context of this conversation, like let's say the Quran or something from like a deen related thing. Is it just let me get the page count in, or let me I know that every letter that I'm reading is giving me hasanat, so let me just get this like hasanat boost going before going to bed as like a more ritualistic thing as opposed to a spiritual and like mindful activity for ourselves as well.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Yes. You're hitting the nail on the head there with kind of the process as well, and everything else that's going on around us. In terms of why this thing is important, I think there's the mindset shifts and the way we think about reading. As we mentioned, it's a command from Allah, and wrapping our heads around that alone, you know, will bring some more intentionality to bring back this habit, whether it's with Quran or with all the other books that, have meaningful, very beneficial material in them that can truly be transformative. And so, as we're talking about reading and exploring the gaps in what we read, how we read, and the distractions and the busy lives and the fatigue, I wanted us to just slow down to this idea that, you know, it can be an act of worship. Frankly, if we're very intentional and clarifying our intentions around why we want to read, it's something that we can layer on top of the other acts of worship that we do to bolster our performance as individuals, our resilience as healthcare professionals, and really our success in this life and the hereafter as just as believers. And so while we're hit with newsletters, we're hit with, news material, audiovisual material keeps coming across, how do we then slow down to the things that are important and can really help us to grow? That's where I want us to focus on. It's not just about information, gathering. Rather, it's about transformation. And, for example, in my own personal case right now, I'm focusing more on reading around, for dunya related things. I'm focusing on personal finance, refreshing my understanding of that, making sure that I'm closing the gap that I personally have in those areas. And so identifying a gap and then trying to fill those gaps with, an intentional habit of reading will be very helpful. And then there's, of course, the other side of it is kind of more spiritual focus, slowing down to our Quran, reading translations, reading tafsir, or reading books that explain the deen to us. And I'll get into some of those books that, we can lean into, inshallah. Um, and then the fact that, especially for us as healthcare professionals, one of the things that the literature has shown around reading and how it's transformative is in terms of the benefit of, this what they call cognitive composure. So when we read books that really inform how we interact with the world around us, then we're less reactive and we're more likely to be intentional and to be more responsive in more meaningful ways. And people around us will start to notice these things as well, especially when we have a clear agenda. My intentions are clear why I'm choosing to read this particular book. I'm also very intentional about, the area of good that I'm seeking. Then it becomes truly a transformative experience. It impacts our identity. You can also start to build systems, that make you more effective and more efficient as a healthcare professional, but frankly, across all of our lives. Any thoughts about that?
I think one thought that came to mind was when you talked about how, some of the literature is showing that when you're reading, it helps with that, like, cognitive, I forgot the word that you said.
Composure, cognitive composure.
Cognitive composure, and I think that, part of that well, this is just my initial assumption about it, I could be completely wrong, but, I feel like that comes from, actually engaging with with the actual contents of the book as you're going through it,
Mhm.
and I think that reflectively from what we just talked about with regards to how I normally go about getting my information through audiovisual or converting text into audio. It's like taking that moment to sort of reflect and process what it is that I just heard or just seen rather than just like, okay, I kind of understood that and moving on.
Mhm.
Because it can give the facade of, oh yeah, I understood what just happened, but then ask me 5 minutes later what I just listened to, and I may not be able to give you the same level of detail. And I think that reflection and engagement with the media that you're using to learn is an important component of that development of that cognitive composure.
Yeah, it is. It is an essential part of it. Without engaging with the content intentionally, it's hard for that content to have any impact on us. It would be, information that we can leverage maybe very quickly, but then we don't really imbibe or embrace uh, the deep transformative power of that content without being intentional around how we engage it. So yeah, in terms of kind of the mindsets around reading, one is this idea of that reading is an ibadah because it's a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was the first revelation. And then the idea of going deep and engaging the content so that it is transformative. And then we build this muscle of cognitive composure under pressure so that we're more responsive, we're more intentional rather than reactive, especially under stress, which is very common for healthcare professionals. And then leveraging that to, um, you know, pick up very intentionally things we're learning so that we're building systems that work better for us. Maybe I pick up a book on, uh, like I mentioned earlier, the example of finance. And they talk about a framework for how you structure, your personal finances in terms of your emergency funds versus everything else, that kind of thing. And then you put it into practice. And then you slowly build from that for a few months. And then within maybe 6 months to a year, you've really implemented it. And that's become kind of part of your identity in terms of how you execute on your personal finance. So that's kind of the depth that we want to go, um, you know, so that it's not just grazing or scrolling through the headlines. So for today, what we want to try to do is kind of get into a system of a 15-minute reading ritual that, all of us can start tonight if we're committed to this path of reading. And then we'll do a community challenge. And then I'll share some books that we can all consider to read, inshallah. But before we get into the specifics of this, I wanted to also slow down to the idea of beyond the mindsets, you know, the idea of a 15-minute reading ritual is to create a system that's sustainable. And so when you think about systems, you know, this is one system that I'm going to propose today, which is one is, going back to those mindsets and leveraging those mindsets to renew our intentions around reading. Some of the most transformative books for me, actually, I have one of them here, is this book on managing yourself. And if anybody has kind of, been through some of the talks that I've done, this is the book that one of those books that I always talk about. It's a Harvard Business Review series on managing yourself, which has a compilation of articles from some of the leading thinkers of the last, 50 years. And I know that that book has definitely shaped my identity. And which is why, I keep referring to it. And so renewing our intention about growth specifically, and in which area I want to grow as an individual, whether it's in Dean, whether it's specifically in my healthcare profession, whether it's with regards to my relationships, my family life, my finances, or in terms of how I manage myself, my energy levels, whether it's nutrition, movement, sleep. Books can be very, very powerful in helping to shape that, any of those areas of our lives. And so renewing our intentions, firstly, that reading is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that it has that transformative power in our identity and in helping us to grow. And the more we grow, the more likely, as a community, we'll become peak performers, we'll become more resilient, and overall, inshallah, successful in matters of deen, matters of the dunya. And then, once we renew that intention, we do need to then develop a system around that intention and make dua. It's not rocket science that we have to eliminate distractions. One way to do that is to simply just put our phones in airplane mode and consider print material over electronic material. What I do is I generally enjoy reading from print material. I had a time when I spent a lot of time on the Kindle device as well, until the one I had packed up, and then I went back to my print. But the advantage of the Kindle type of material is that it can have low light, blue light that's limited, doesn't impact your sleep, like if you're doing reading at bedtime, for example. And then to anchor it to something. The suggestion is to anchor it to maybe a salah window, a quiet time that you may have, maybe after Isha, after Maghrib, for some people after Fajr, and then committing to doing just a little bit every day, whatever that means for you. It may be, 1 page, 2 pages, or it may be time bound. So, 1 to 2, 5 to 10 minutes of reading, and it almost has to sound ridiculous for us to be able to do it. There's this idea of tiny habits when we're trying to form a new habit. And the easier it is for us to execute on, the more likely we're going to do it. And then it compounds over time. Eventually, we'll get to the point where we're reading maybe 30 minutes a day. Some people may get to a point where they're reading an hour a day. And this is why, one of the mantra of these leading professionals in the industry, across many industries, CEOs, is that they read a lot of books. And so growth is a direct correlation to the habit of reading, which is why it's also one of those habits of highly successful Muslim healthcare professionals. I'm curious what you guys think about this framework. Anyone still here?
Yeah. I was gonna say, in terms of eliminating the noise,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I have been trying to do is, for me, still digital is a lot easier than like the hard copy, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's probably still going to maintain the way that I go about it for at least the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a device that I consider like the work device, and so I'm
Mm-hmm.
not allowed to even open up like YouTube, for example. And sometimes you might think that it's like ridiculous that if I'm on the work device and I really need to look up a video for explain something, I'll go onto my non-work device, Google the video, and when I find the exact link, only then am I allowed to watch it on my work device because it like creates this barrier in my mind that I can't do certain things on this device. And so that kind of helps me compartmentalize and separate things that way. And it does end up helping. Even when it comes to like social media in that sense, I have like a separate account that's exclusively for like this type of material. And so even with the algorithms that are being catered to what you're getting fed, it's in relation to the content that you're consuming. And so you can kind of use that to your advantage in a way rather than it being used against you when when you have all of these distractors combined with what you have. Also, I think that you kind of touched upon it, but well, like, um, I was thinking about how, for some of the Sahaba, it was like it took them like 12 years to memorize like Surah Al-Baqarah,
Yeah.
and it's important that you know if even if it's just one page and there was something profound in that page in that 15 minutes that that you're reading, you don't you can take a moment and stop and just like read that part, and if there was
Mhm.
one sentence for whatever reason that was really meaningful, you can take that. If you only have 15 minutes, it's that 15 minutes, but maximizing that time, not necessarily just in the consumption, but like,
Mhm.
if it takes you that 1 year to finish a book that technically you could have finished in a single sitting if you wanted to,
Mhm.
but the having that reflection on its content, anchoring what you're learning to whatever it is your intention was for reading that, I think can be transformative both in your goals for reading that content in the first place, as well as taking those baby steps necessary to make real change, because sometimes we'll be like, I read through that was amazing, and then like maybe a few days later you're trying to remember certain points from what you read, but there were so many points that it's like I remember maybe like 3 out of 10 points, and you may or may not end up ever going back to those other 7 points, even though at the time of reading you were like, those are some pretty important 7 points. And so I think that depending on your intention and the content that you're looking at, you may have to dial back the rate at which you're consuming that. And I know for some people, let's say you finish chapter 1 and chapter 2 and you're still that those chapters were very dense, and so you're still working on the contents of those chapters, you can necessarily take a break from the remainder of that content, and maybe you know if you feel like you really still want to maintain the habit of reading while working on other things, you can read partially of something else, or if you feel that's necessary, but not like just stepping over something that you found necessary enough to take that pause, and being intentional with how you're going about it. I think that's kind of the do tiny and daily part. I think really helps.
Yeah. 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 I love that. That's excellent insights, and I especially appreciate, being frank about digital versus paper-based. We're in a time where we can't do without digital for sure. And so learning how to use them to serve us as opposed to us just becoming slaves to them and just going in every direction that the device is telling us to go, uh, is a huge skill that all of us need to develop in this day and age. And then you mentioned this idea of a separate YouTube account, for example. I've never tried that, but that's brilliant. MashaAllah. Thank you for sharing. Um, Dr. Anwar, I saw you unmuted as well.
Yeah, no, I'm just following. I'm listening curiously because, like I mentioned, I mean, the one of the purposes of reading is to gain new knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have developed a habit, good or bad, I don't know. I like I said, I mean, I've never been a avid reader. So what I've been doing is that, I mean, with the AI, for example, there is for example, the topic, I need to understand the topic of Palestinian history. So
Mm-hmm.
there's so many books and so many material out there that it's impossible to cover everything, and there's
Mm-hmm.
such a wealth of information there. So just like World War I, World War II, what triggered, what were the brief history. So
Mm-hmm.
what have developed a habit. I mean, whatever topic I try to need to understand and gather more knowledge, I just tell AI to, hey, give me a summarized version of certain conflict, Armenian and Argentinian conflict, or what happened in Bosnia. So that's what I've been doing, and uh, rather than reading the whole books and chapters.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Jazakallah khair for sharing. I mean, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that, and you know, one of the things that I've been learning as I've learned like some of the background of AI and like better ways to utilize it is, if we mentioned like digital books and stuff that we're reading,
Mm-hmm.
you can actually like attach or prime the AI with those books, and so you can have it engage with you using the contents of those books, because AI is basically a pool of information, including verified and unverified sources. And
Mm-hmm.
so the one way that you can, like, I guess, enhance that method of, I guess, summarizing
Learning.
or
Yeah.
understanding or engaging with the content is, you know, by priming it with a source that you believe is relatively credible. And
Mm-hmm.
then it can provide you with the citations within the book. If that's, you're like, oh, that's actually kind of interesting, I can go to that chapter of that
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. Jazakallah khair. Yes. I had a feeling AI was gonna come up in our conversation. But yeah, you guys are hitting the nail on the head. Um, I think when it comes to AI, it's, just like you've said, it can really help us to gather a lot of information that we would otherwise not be able to uh, in a very digestible format very quickly. Um, but the question is for areas that we do want to go deeper, right? Once AI has kind of given us that high-level summary and you still want to go deeper, I think that's where reading comes in, deep reading or reading with presence. Because a summary can't really give us that full perspective of, an idea that we're trying to wrap our heads around. Um, but AI is incredibly, incredibly useful. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the different forms of generative AI. One that's many authors talk about that's really good is Claude. If you haven't already tried it, just wanted to place that plug. And it does also give you specific references so that if you want to go deeper into a specific resource, you can also dive into that. But yeah. And then I wanted to go back to some of the points you made also, I mean, earlier about how, the habit of reading and how to get the most value out of it. Uh, slowing down and, maybe you get to a place where you find some really useful material. How do you capture them? One system that's proposed by different authors is similar to what James Clear does in his newsletter, the author of Atomic Habits. He has this a system of 3-2-1. So basically, three key ideas, you know, uh, when we want to do deep reading, reading with presence, trying to get the most out of it for transformation. Just go in it with the intention of, what we want to learn. And then capturing three key ideas from the book or from the chapter or from, the article. And then maybe identifying two quotes. So two quotes or two concepts that you want to re-explore at a later date or leverage. And then one action item. Because ultimately the point of reading is growth and that we become better as a result of that exercise. And so capturing three key ideas, two quotes or two concepts that you want to go deeper with, and then one action item that we can take um, from reading that material. Do you guys already do anything along this line when you're reading to be more intentional around what you're capturing from the material?
I actually had a mentor who used to tell me that not just for like reading, but for any type of lecture that we'd be going to. This was back in undergrad years ago. Um, and he was like, if you're going to be stuck in this space anyway, and there's this time that you're going to have to be engaging with these lectures,
Yeah.
you might as well, take points of something that you can walk away from that. And he kind of highlighted also like, if you really don't like what you're looking at, it's you can one of the things that you can learn is what exactly is making this lecture so bad.
Mhm.
And so I think that was one thing that's stuck with me for a while, which kind of ties into what you're talking about. It's like, it's not necessarily walking in with the intention of like, what are the three things that I've learned. Mainly because sometimes some areas are very dense, and so those three things can be in like the first like paragraph of the chapter.
Yeah.
And so it's for me, it's more like, you know, and I guess also tying into like the actionable component of it, I semi disagree with the idea that there always has to be an actionable component, um, because I think part of it is also just the process of learning and being exposed to new information
Mhm.
can be transformative in and of itself.
Right.
Like, if you are reading something, let's say you meant Dr. Anwar mentioned, these different, the Palestine conflict, for example, or all these other conflicts, learning that history doesn't necessarily lead to an actionable component, but there can be reflections that come of that and
Mhm.
understandings of like, depending on the nature of what you're studying, like the geopolitical aspects or like the suffering or whatever it is. Those that process itself in and of itself is a learning experience rather than there necessarily being like, now that I know this, I can do, or maybe I'm just interpreting that portion wrong, but yeah.
No, no, no. Great perspective. And sometimes the action is a reflection, right? It's just a framework. One of my mentors says that all frameworks are wrong. Some of them are useful, right? So it's a simple way to capture, be more intentional about when we engage content. It's not perfect by any stretch. So that's a good point. Thank you for highlighting that. Any other thoughts? Okay. The next idea is this just scrolling versus presence. I think it's pretty obvious, but let me just share a quick video that will help us to wrap our heads around this even deeper. You still see my screen? Do you guys see my screen?
I can see you.
Okay. I'm trying to share a video. Okay, there it is.
And a mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone.
We all suffer from not being able to focus, to deeply work or study because it's all so much more difficult than grabbing the phone and checking TikTok. But what if you could switch scrolling endlessly on social media with reading a book? Replace something that numbs your mind with something that sharpens it. I don't think I know someone who was more addicted to scrolling and checking the phone than I was. And I would always be kind of jealous of people that are somehow able to pick up books and read instead. One thing is that they always seem to be more eloquent, but it's also that they were always able to focus deeply on things without being distracted every 2 minutes. I found out about this book, Deep Work, that talks exactly about the ability to focus and eliminate distractions. It said something that really stuck with me. The ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare. At exactly the same time, it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and then make it the core of their working life will thrive. And while you know it's true, it feels kind of hard to do anything about it. But in this video, I will share with you what actually works and how to make it easy to read a book instead of wasting hours mindlessly scrolling.
All right, so that was kind of just to highlight, the pain point of scrolling versus reading with deep presence. I'm gonna share that link with you guys because it's a longer video. It's about 10 minutes. If it's, hopefully beneficial, but I think it's a great resource because I think he captures some of the key essence of reading with presence that Cal Newport worked on his book Deep Work. Did anything come up for you guys as you listen to I think his name is Dave Burgee? Did anything else come up as we were working through that? No? Yes.
Well, I mean, I did have the same question of like, how are some people able to like sit down and that's for sure. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And technology. Okay, let's get back to the slides. So yeah, they have a system. The reason why they're able to do that is because they have a system in place. And that read framework is one system. It's definitely subject to how easy it is for any of us to be able to use it. So what we want to walk away with today is just the idea of committing to a system. First of all, is to renew our intentions, but then committing to a system that helps us to be able to do what all these people do. And this is basically a summary of doing deep work. Is that framework is identifying when we will do it. The recommendation is a Salah anchor. It could be another anchor like bedtime, or it could even be before you start your day as a healthcare professional, maybe before you start rounding. Just take 10 minutes and read something it could even be an article. It doesn't necessarily have to be a book. But when, where, what, and then how you will track it. And I can share a worksheet to help do that as well, inshallah. And then who will be your accountability partner on this journey? So let's take a couple of minutes to just think through this, and then we're already getting close to the end of the event. Alhamdulillah. What do you guys think? When do you think will be optimal time for you to read? For me, it's actually after Isha. That's tends to be my time because the kids are in bed and I don't have any, but usually if I don't have meetings at the masjid, then I can slow down and do my own time for a few minutes, and then the rest of the day continues to wrap up. What are you guys thinking?
Pressure is a good time.
Okay. I mean, what time works for you?
I think the problem is that it's variable. I think the most consistent time is definitely after Isha for
Okay.
me, and that's usually but that usually ends up leading me to staying awake much later after Isha. Um, but uh, you know, as I'm thinking about it, it's more like if what we're talking about is actually reading as opposed to absorbing content in any other way. I think Isha is like the main time that I'd actually be able to physically like read something because like one of the things that sometimes I'll do with your newsletters is I would take it into the text to audio AI, and then I'll take that audio file and I'll listen to the audio file when I'm like either commuting or whatever, and then like reflect on it that way. But in terms of actually being able to physically engage with it in mindfully engage with it, I would say either after Isha or right before Asr.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think the reality definitely hits as as we're talking about it. There's that risk also of self-sabotage in the evenings because we're tired. But it's a matter of commitment. So we start with an intention, but the commitment is when we actually have a clear plan for it. So sounds like everybody's settling around after Isha, and I don't know where your physical spot is going to be. Is it in the bedroom? Is it in your home office? Uh, where will that be, inshallah? And then what book? I have some recommendations, but the key thing is not the recommendations, it's really what you're drawn to at this time to get that habit in. It could even be Quran, frankly. Um, or a book that explains the Quran, or a book about the Seerah, or a book about, personal management or family life, any of those things, or even a professional book. But the key thing is to commit to one and then just slowly chip at it and see how far you can take it over a 30-day period. So this is mainly to, encourage everyone who is setting that intention to share their micro wins, even if it's a page, two a day. And then if you could also share any big ideas that you come across that you think may be beneficial to the community, or that was impactful for you, you know, that goes a really long way. And so going back to the read framework, what am I committing to in terms of the 30-day challenge? 2 pages, 10 minutes per day, anchored to Salah, and then sharing one reflection, and to try not to miss more than 2 days in a row, because it gets harder to get back on track after that. Ideally, you don't even want to miss more than one. Once there's this concept of the second mistake that James Clear talks about in his book, The Atomic Habits, which is that once we miss something twice, it's almost downhill from there. But we can always pick things back up. So the goal is to try not to miss more than once, and then to just try to get back on track, inshallah. Um, and then, here are some starter reading lists. Some light reading. Productive Muslim book is a good one. Or Deep Work from Carl Newport. Well, Carl Newport's book is actually not light, now that I'm thinking about it. And then there's books like When Hearing Becomes Listening by Sheikh Mikhail Ahmed Smith at Qalam. Here are some of my favorites. I think I've shared this list before. And then if anybody's interested, I can share a discount code for those Productive Muslim Company books. And what we're trying to do is to build this muscle of reading as an ibadah. Sleeping can be an ibadah as long as our intention is in the right place. And what reading does is it helps us to grow, because when we do deep reading, reading with presence, we discover things about ourselves and our potential that we otherwise would not have discovered, leading towards self-mastery. And then embracing that stewardship, leadership that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us for on earth in service to humanity. Any thoughts, any other thoughts, reflections so far?
Well, I had more of a question than a reflection.
Go ahead.
When it came to anchoring to Salah, are is that because obviously some of the books that we're talking about are more for personal growth as opposed to like, let's say technically you can make anything an ibadah if you with the right intention, I guess, in that sense. But I'm still a little unclear about what exactly is being meant when it says like rooting it in like Salah or grounding it in Salah in terms of the READ acronym that you had.
Mhm. So the A in the READ acronym is basically, anchoring it to, you can anchor it to anything. Um, one of the core messages of, forming habits and routines from all the experts like Atomic Habits author James Clear, or the author of Tiny Habits, is this idea of habit stacking. So if you have a habit that's already kind of established, automated, you're not likely to miss it. If you want to build a new muscle, a new habit, then you want to kind of layer this new habit to the one that's already established. And for us as Muslim healthcare professionals, Muslims in general, Salah is always one of those pillars of our days. And so um, anchoring something like reading, obviously when you're reading something after Salah, you're likely to be reading something beneficial, right? We make dua, the dua of Musa alayhi salam, Rabbi zidni ilma, wa Allah increase me in knowledge. Rabbi zidna ilma, right? Wa Allah increase us in knowledge. Or, another dua that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught to the companions, Allahumma inni as'aluka, O Allah, I ask you for beneficial knowledge, ilman nafi'a. So this is the idea of kind of anchoring it to Salah. It doesn't have to be Salah. It's really about, so the peak performance science of forming the new habits, which is habit stacking, and then our own Islamic tradition of a pillar of our day that, uh, for most of us, inshallah, it's already established, is Salah. But it doesn't have to be Salah. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah khairan.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
If we wanted to access these slides later or the recording, if there's going to be a recording posted, where would we find that?
I'll share the links, inshallah, on the group so that
Inshallah.
you can access it. Yeah, recording and slides.
Jazakallah khairan.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll just mention a few additional stuff. So we have, free life design coaching for Muslim healthcare professionals. I was talking to some colleagues yesterday at another program, and a lot of people were reflecting on the challenge of balancing their commitments to deen, their commitments to family, with work obligations. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. It's something that, if you look at many of the SakeenahMD newsletters, it's something that I reflect on often. So if you guys know anybody who's in that boat, who just needs some help, some support, a space, to get clear on how they can build forward, then this is a link that can be shared with them, inshallah. And then for the newsletter, I think I'm gonna take the feedback that Dr. Ali shared that he usually doesn't read to all the way to the end. Maybe I'll put it up on the newsletter periodically so that it gets more visibility, inshallah. And feel free to share the WhatsApp community as well. We are working towards moving that community to a more robust space like Circle. Inshallah, make dua for us. And that's all we have today. So I will share the link for the recording and then the slides, inshallah. Any final thoughts before we close? Okay, in the absence of none, Jazakallah khair, guys, for showing up today. Really appreciate your time and your engagement, and really for sharing deeply about your own journey with reading, and some things that I learned today have been really very powerful. Jazakallah khair. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.